The Time Traveler's Tale. Chapter 1. The Time Machine. Once upon a time, there was a brilliant inventor named Jack. Jack had always been fascinated by the idea of time travel and had spent years building a machine that could transport him through time. One day, Jack decided to test his machine for the first time. He climbed into the cockpit and set the controls for the future. As he pulled the lever, the machine hummed to life, and Jack felt himself being pulled forward in time. When the machine finally came to a stop, Jack stepped out and looked around. To his amazement, he found himself in a world that was vastly different from the one he knew. The buildings were taller, the cars were faster, and the people dressed in strange, unfamiliar clothes. Jack realized that he had traveled several hundred years into the future. He explored this new world, marveling at the technological advancements and cultural changes that had taken place. As the day wore on, Jack knew it was time to return home. He climbed back into the time machine and set the controls for his own time period. The machine hummed to life once more, and Jack felt himself being pulled back through time. When the machine came to a stop, Jack stepped out, exhilarated by his adventure. He knew that he had discovered something incredible, something that could change the course of history. And with that, Jack began to plan his next adventure through time. Chapter 2. The First Leap. Excited by his successful trip to the future, Jack couldn't wait to take his time machine out for another spin. This time, he decided to travel back in time to the 18th century. As he landed, Jack stumbled out of the time machine, disoriented and a bit dizzy. But he quickly regained his bearings and set out to explore this new world. As he wandered through the streets, Jack caught sight of a beautiful young woman named Charlotte. She was walking alone and looked lost. Jack approached her and introduced himself, offering to show her around the city. Charlotte accepted Jack's offer, and together they explored the city's many wonders. They visited the local market, watched street performers, and even took a ride on a horse-drawn carriage. Over the course of the day, Jack and Charlotte grew closer. They discovered a shared love of adventure and a fascination with the unknown. As the sun began to set, Jack knew it was time to return to his own time period. He promised Charlotte that he would return one day to visit her again. As Jack climbed back into the time machine, he felt a pang of regret at leaving Charlotte behind. But he knew that he had many more adventures ahead of him, and he couldn't wait to see where his time machine would take him next. And with that, he set the controls for his own time period and took the leap through time once more. Chapter 3. The Wrong Turn. Jack had been traveling through time for months, exploring different eras and meeting new people along the way. But during his most recent trip, something went wrong. He had intended to travel to the 1920s, a time known for its speakeasies and jazz music. But as the time machine landed, Jack realized that something was off. The streets were lined with cobblestones, and the buildings looked like they were from the 17th century. Puzzled, Jack wandered through the city, trying to figure out where he was. But as he turned a corner, he found himself face to face with a group of angry villagers. They accused Jack of being a witch and demanded that he be burned at the stake. Terrified, Jack tried to explain that he was a time traveler, but they wouldn't listen. As the flames grew higher, Jack closed his eyes and prepared for the worst. But just as he thought all was lost, he felt a sudden jolt, and the world around him went black. When Jack opened his eyes again, he was back in his own time period, safe and sound. He realized that he must have taken a wrong turn in the time machine and ended up in a dangerous era. Although shaken by the experience, Jack knew that he couldn't give up on his time travel adventures. He resolved to be more careful in the future and to always double-check his time machine's coordinates before taking the leap through time once more. Chapter 4. The Lost Treasure. After his close call with the angry villagers, Jack decided to take a break from time travel and focus on his other passions. But as time went on, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still so much left to discover in the past. One day, while doing research at the library, Jack came across a book that told the story of a lost treasure. According to the book, a wealthy merchant had hidden his fortune in a secret location during the 17th century. The treasure had never been found, and its location had been lost to time. Jack was intrigued. He realized that he could use his time machine to travel back to the 17th century and search for the lost treasure. As he landed in the past, Jack set out to explore the city, looking for clues that would lead him to the treasure. He visited the merchant's home, searched through old maps and documents, and even talked to locals who might have heard stories about the treasure. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, but Jack refused to give up. Finally, after months of searching, he found a clue that led him to a secret underground chamber. As he entered the chamber, Jack couldn't believe his eyes. The room was filled with gold coins, jewels, and precious artifacts. He had found the lost treasure. Overwhelmed by his discovery, Jack loaded as much treasure as he could into the time machine and set the controls for his own time period. As he landed in the present, he knew that he had uncovered something truly incredible. From that day forward, Jack was known as a great adventurer and explorer. He continued to travel through time, always searching for new discoveries and treasures that would inspire the world. And with each leap through time, he knew that the possibilities were endless. Chapter 5: The Time Paradox. Jack had been traveling through time for years, but he never thought that he would encounter a time paradox. However, during one of his trips, that's exactly what happened. As he arrived in the 1960s, Jack noticed something strange. He saw himself walking down the street, as if he had already been there before. At first, he thought that he was seeing things, but then he realized that he was looking at his future self. Confused, Jack approached his future self and asked him what was going on. His future self explained that he had come back to this time period to fix a mistake that he had made during his last trip. Together, they worked to fix the mistake, and Jack's future self disappeared into the time machine. But as Jack tried to leave, he realized that the time machine was malfunctioning. It seemed that the changes that his future self had made had created a paradox, and the time machine couldn't handle it. Desperate to fix the machine and escape the paradox, Jack searched for a solution. He visited scientists and experts, but no one could help him. Finally, he came up with an idea. He decided to travel back to the moment when his future self had first arrived in the past. He would talk to his past self and prevent him from making the mistake that had caused the paradox. As he arrived in the past, Jack approached his past self and explained everything. Together, they fixed the mistake, and the paradox was resolved. The time machine was back to normal, and Jack could continue his travels through time. As he left the 1960s, Jack realized that he had learned a valuable lesson. Time travel was a powerful tool, but it had to be used carefully. Even the smallest change could have a huge impact on the future, and it was up to him to make sure that he used his power responsibly. Chapter 6: The Alternate Reality. Jack had always been fascinated by the idea of alternate realities. He had read countless books and watched numerous movies about what life would be like if just one thing had been different. And during one of his trips through time, Jack found himself experiencing just that. As he arrived in the 1800s, Jack noticed that something was off. The streets were empty, the buildings looked different, and there were strange machines that he had never seen before. He realized that he had landed in an alternate reality. Curious, Jack explored this new world. He met people who were familiar to him, but whose lives had taken different paths. He saw technology that was far beyond anything in his own reality. And he even witnessed events that had never happened in his own time. As he traveled through this alternate reality, Jack began to wonder what would happen if he changed something. Would he be able to alter the course of this reality? Would he be able to make things better? With those questions in mind, Jack set out to make a change. He visited historical figures and convinced them to take different actions. He shared his knowledge of the future with inventors and engineers, helping them to create even more advanced technology. At first, everything seemed to be going well. The alternate reality began to look more and more like a utopia. But then, Jack realized that he had made a mistake. The changes that he had made had unintended consequences. People who were once happy were now miserable, and the technology that he had helped create was being used for nefarious purposes. Distraught, Jack realized that he had to undo the changes that he had made. He visited the historical figures once again and convinced them to follow their original paths. He destroyed the advanced technology and tried to undo as much of the damage as he could. As he left the alternate reality and returned to his own time, Jack realized that he had learned another valuable lesson. Alternate realities were fascinating, but they weren't meant to be meddled with. Changing the course of history could have unforeseeable consequences, and it was up to him to make sure that he didn't make the same mistake again. Chapter 7: The Time Heist. Jack had always been careful with his time travel adventures. He knew that even the smallest change could have a huge impact on the future, and he didn't want to risk causing any harm. But during one trip, he found himself involved in a time heist that would change everything. As he arrived in the 22nd century, Jack was surprised to see a group of thieves breaking into a government facility. They were using advanced technology to bypass the security systems and gain access to a time machine. Jack watched in horror as they activated the time machine and disappeared into the past. He knew that they could be changing history as he knew it, and he had to do something to stop them. Determined to catch the thieves, Jack followed them through time. He watched as they stole valuable artifacts and rare materials from different time periods. He even saw them interacting with historical figures, trying to manipulate them for their own gain. As he gathered more information, Jack realized that the time heist was part of a larger plot. The thieves were trying to accumulate enough resources to change the future in their favor. With this knowledge, Jack decided to take action. He teamed up with other time travelers who were equally outraged by the heist, and together, they planned a counterattack. They ambushed the thieves during one of their time heists, causing a disruption that prevented them from completing their mission. The stolen artifacts were returned to their rightful places in time, and the thieves were apprehended. As Jack returned to his own time, he realized that he had learned an important lesson. Time travel could be used for good or evil, and it was up to him to use his power responsibly. He vowed to continue exploring the past and the future, but always with the intention of preserving history and preventing those who would use time travel for their own selfish gain. Chapter 8: The Future of Humanity. As Jack traveled through time, he couldn't help but wonder about the future of humanity. What would the world look like in 100 years, or even 1,000? Would people still be living on Earth, or would they have ventured out into the stars? With these questions in mind, Jack decided to take a trip to the future. As he arrived in the year 3000, he was amazed by what he saw. The world had changed in ways that he could never have imagined. Gone were the bustling cities and crowded streets. Instead, he saw vast, interconnected networks of cities and towns, all powered by clean, renewable energy sources. The air was pure, and the environment was pristine. As he traveled further into the future, Jack saw that humanity had continued to push the boundaries of exploration. They had colonized other planets and established outposts throughout the galaxy. And they had even made contact with other intelligent life forms, sharing knowledge and resources in a peaceful coexistence. But despite these incredible achievements, Jack also saw that humanity still faced challenges. Disease, hunger, and poverty still existed, even in this utopian future. And there were still those who sought to use their power and influence for their own gain. With this realization, Jack knew that he had a responsibility to make a difference. He worked with the people of the future, sharing his knowledge of the past and helping them to solve the problems that still persisted. As he prepared to return to his own time, Jack felt a sense of hope. The future of humanity was bright, and it was up to him and others like him to help guide it towards an even better tomorrow. And with that, Jack returned to his own time, determined to do his part in creating a brighter future for all of humanity. Chapter 9: The Time Paradox. As Jack traveled through time, he had always been careful not to interfere with the events of the past. But during one trip, he found himself caught in a time paradox that threatened to unravel the fabric of time itself. It all started when Jack arrived in the 1800s to witness a historic event. But as he stood on the sidelines, he realized that he had inadvertently caused a chain of events that would lead to a disastrous outcome. Desperate to set things right, Jack traveled back in time to try and prevent his past self from making the mistake. But as he did so, he realized that he had created a time paradox, a situation in which the past and the future were inextricably linked. As he struggled to untangle the web of time, Jack realized that he needed to enlist the help of other time travelers. Together, they worked to close the paradox and prevent any further damage to the timeline. But as they worked, they realized that the paradox was not the result of Jack's actions alone. There were others who had also made changes to the past, and their actions were now reverberating through time. In a race against time, Jack and his fellow time travelers worked to undo the damage and restore the timeline. It was a difficult and dangerous task, but they knew that the fate of the universe hung in the balance. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they succeeded. The timeline was restored, and the paradox was closed. But as Jack returned to his own time, he couldn't help but wonder what other dangers lay ahead in the infinite expanse of time and space. Answer: he vowed to continue exploring the mysteries of time travel, but always with caution and respect for the delicate balance of the universe. Chapter 10: A New Beginning. As Jack traveled through time, he had experienced incredible adventures and seen wonders beyond his wildest dreams. But as he returned to his own time, he knew that his journey was far from over. With a renewed sense of purpose, Jack set out to use his knowledge and experiences to make a difference in his own time. He worked tirelessly to promote peace, equality, and environmental responsibility, knowing that these values would be critical to building a better future for all. As he traveled the world, Jack was amazed by the progress that had been made since he had first begun his journey. The world had become a more connected and compassionate place, with people from all walks of life working together towards common goals. But despite these advances, Jack knew that there was still much work to be done. There were still those who sought to exploit others for their own gain, and there were still those who turned a blind eye to the suffering of their fellow human beings. Answer: Jack continued to fight for what he believed in, always mindful of the lessons he had learned during his travels through time. He knew that the future was not set in stone, and that it was up to each and every one of us to shape it into something truly extraordinary. As he looked towards the horizon, Jack felt a sense of hope and wonder. The possibilities were endless, and he knew that the best was yet to come. And with that, Jack set off into the future, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For him, the journey through time was not just a way to explore the past and the future, but a way to create a better present for all.